It is now my great honour to get to the highlight of this evening and introduce our panellists one by one. As I do, I'll ask that each panellist steps up to the front and takes their place on the podium at one of the stools. Okay, I will start with Shane. He's a sports and exercise psychologist and director of Performance Boost, a specialist provider of sport and exercise psychologist services. Having consulted to elite athletes at the Victorian Institute of Sport and West Australian Institute of Sport, elite cricket, AFL, basketball, professional golfers, professional tennis players, and the NRL. He is an experienced consultant and manager and works in organisational settings providing executive coaching and leadership development to leaders and teams. Please welcome Shane Hanks.
Thank you.
Next, an 800 metre runner, having represented Australia in 2009, 2010 and 2011. She has raced internationally in the European Athletics Tour in 2011 and has been ranked in the top 3 800 metre runners in Australia from 2008 to 2012. She has also remained the WA State Champion for the 800 metre run from 2000 until 2012. Ladies and gentlemen, Holly Noak. Next, he has spent over 28 years in a variety of roles within Australia's high-performance sports system and was awarded the Australian Sports Medal for Service for Sport in 2000. He has been in his current position with WAIS for 11 years. He is also a board member of the International Association of Sport Performance Centres and immediate past chairman of the Australian National Elite Sports Council. Please join me in welcoming Steve Lawrence. And of course, until the announcement of his retirement from Test cricket in 2007, Justin was one of Australia's great top-order batsmen. Originally a number 3, he moved to opener in 2001 and played 105 tests, scoring 7,696 runs, including 23 test centuries. Few have worn the baggy green with greater pride. Along with Matthew Hayden, Justin formed a hugely successful opening partnership which ranks as the best in Australian history and featured 6 double-century stands. He was named as a member of the Order of Australia in the 2008 Queen's Birthday Honours List. In 2009, he was appointed assistant coach of the Australian cricket team, and in 2012, he achieved a lifelong dream when he was approached to take on the role as coach of Western Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, Justin Langer. Thank you for joining us here this evening. Now, the plan is that I will interview the panellists, and after the formal part of the evening is over, they have all agreed to stay back and answer any questions you may have of them. So let's get underway. Drugs in sport has been all over the news, as you will be well aware, over the last month, with the AFL admitting a sharp rise in the number of players testing positive to recreational drugs, from cocaine to ecstasy to methamphetamines. We had a South American cyclist being suspended for a positive drug test, and former head of the World Anti-Doping Agency, Dick Pound, was quoted as saying today's tennis players are using performance-enhancing drugs for sure. And then we hear about performance management in a different context. 3 players in the Indian Premier League have been suspended for taking bribes to influence the outcome of games, for a financial benefit of those paying the bribes, of course. So my question to you tonight is this. Is the issue basically that if the financial rewards are great enough, then our athletes are prepared to do whatever it takes? Shane, would you like to comment?
It's a big statement. I guess obviously from a sports psychological perspective, I don't think that's the reason why athletes get into sport, and I'm sure Holly will talk about her reasons. What I see is genuinely a love of their sport in many cases. So I think that's how people get into the game, and I think clearly along the way there is a lot of hard work and sacrifice, and some sports are more well rewarded and some cultures are more well rewarded, and countries and so forth that are able to pay their sports people better. So I think it very much comes down to what sport the athlete is participating in. Also, it comes down to personality, it comes down to integrity, all of those sort of things. But I don't think it's the reason why they get into their sport. I don't think anyone comes into the sport with the intention of taking drugs or taking bribes or anything else. But I think obviously it does happen, and that's as a function of the sport, personality, the inducements, success, the degree to which other people are taking drugs and so in sport as well. So I think it's potentially a byproduct of sport itself as it exists today.
Holly, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I completely agree that initially you get into a sport, it's like an innate thing that you desire to do, you want to achieve. I wouldn't personally say you want to achieve at all costs. And then once again, the type of sport you're doing and the country you're doing that sport in, for example, in track and field, unless you are an Olympic medalist, the financial rewards aren't that great. So as far as my sport goes, unless you reach the top of the top, there wouldn't be a financial incentive to take drugs. But then the culture, for example, some countries are more well known for taking drugs in track and field. I believe it's almost expected in their culture that if you are going to compete at the Olympics, you're expected to win, and to do that, you need to be probably taking something, which is really sad, but I don't believe that's the culture in our country, which is fantastic. But yeah, I wouldn't think there was a financial driver. To me, it's a real innate thing and you want to achieve. Unfortunately, I think along the way things go wrong, pressures come up, and some people's morals maybe aren't quite in the right place and they turn to things that they shouldn't.
Thank you, Holly. Steve, did you have anything to add?
Probably not, because I'm going to echo what's already been said, other than to say that even in terms of morals, I don't. Sometimes it's not even that. Sometimes it's just a split-second decision that somebody makes, like all of us in many aspects of life, that leads you down a path which is not the path you want to do or take. And sometimes it's really difficult for people to backtrack and get out of it. So, I think it's just a reflection on how people make decisions, often under very pressured environments, and sometimes it's the right one and sometimes it's the wrong one, which is why I suppose our system, or in terms of the elite sports system, is about trying to provide opportunities for people to learn or to make the right decision, and if they make the wrong decision, to help them figure out why they made that so they can make a better decision going forward.
I think there's also a little confusion about drugs in sport, whether it's illicit drugs and recreational drugs, or whether it's performance-enhancing drugs. So certainly in my sport, cricket, then in the culture of cricket, there's been a lot of instances of illicit drugs, and that for me is a great concern within our society, not only within us in our sport, but in cricket. I've never seen any illicit drugs, full stop, and that's the truth. But I've never ever seen any performance-enhancing drugs, so it's difficult for me to talk about it.
Certainly. Well, on that note then, Justin, as you raise, are there acceptable forms of drugs for performance enhancement, do you believe?
Well, again, no, it's actually a very interesting question because, for example, Voltaren, which is an anti-inflammatory drug, which we can get Nurofen over the counter, but Voltaren, I used to take Voltaren regularly because I was sore in my lower back or I was having trouble with my shoulder or my neck, and Voltaren was almost like taking an aspirin. Is that performance enhancing? Reality is, had I not have taken a Voltaren the night before, or 3 or 4 Voltarens a day, I might not have been able to play the next day. So is that performance enhancing? Maybe it is, yeah. So that's right. So where do we draw the line? So was I a drug cheat? If I was a drug cheat, every single athlete in the world would be drug cheats, if we talk about at that level. If we talk about illicit drugs, we talk about steroids, that's a different kettle of fish. So where do we draw the line?
Shane, from your point of view, where do we draw that line?
Well, it's probably the million-dollar question. I think you're absolutely right, Justin. It's actually an argument that I've had before, and my wife's a sport and exercise medicine physician, and her own code of practice is different. It's different among different practitioners about, for instance, will the doctor in an AFL match administer, a jab, as they like to call it on the TV? Is that going to improve performance in the moment? I think there's no doubt. But the argument is, does it improve it beyond the baseline? And I think that is around the context of in what time period. It was Justin a better player with Voltaren than he wasn't? No, but in the moment, within a time frame comparative to performance without it, or whether it be an aspirin or whether it be an anaesthetic or a local anaesthetic, performance I think has improved in that period, because a lot of players wouldn't be able to come back, and from my understanding, doctors won't administer any local anaesthetic as a jab unless there is no chance of soft tissue damage. A lot of those injuries you can play on with them with no soft tissue damage. So it comes down to, one, I think, around the time period in which we're talking, and is it a sense of return to baseline, and then also the other element is it going to cause damage? And I think that's where the difference is between steroids and Voltaren and aspirin, is that degree of damage. And I think that's a decision that athletes take individually, and whether that's in a split second, as Steve says, or whether that's a deliberate decision. Ultimately, it's to the extent, how badly do you want it? How badly do you want success? Is it worth the damage that steroids might cause? So I think for me, they're some of the issues that I think that athletes contend with, although not necessarily consciously.
Certainly. Thank you. Steve?
So just to expand on that, you remember that athletes, high-performance athletes, accept that the practices that they are undertaking are not within the normal realms of the human body. They try and push it to the limit. So they're already accepting the fact that whatever they do will damage their body, in some way. Elite athletes are very rarely, unfortunately, healthy for a lot of the time. They're having to manage huge amounts of workload, often extreme type actions. So they're already living in a world where every day they've got to try and balance up these decisions about what should I do which is healthy and what should I do that it's not. But just to reinforce the issue about illicit drugs and performance-enhancing drugs, there are performance-enhancing drugs which are legal, and you can take safely. Voltaren would be a clear example of that. But the drugs in sports that are banned are, in general, those ones that are illegal anyway, and they're mainly illegal because they have been proven to show damage to your health. So, that's why, that'd be the clear differentiation. I think that's what Shane was trying to say. It's that line of differentiation. And around that, you can start to have this really nice grey area where if you're unsure about which part of the grey you're in, it's quite easily to step into a bit that's actually black. I think it's not an easy topic for anybody to deal with.
Certainly. Holly, do you have anything to add on acceptable performance enhancement?
I was just going back in my mind as you were speaking of I'm surprised I didn't rattle when I walked, when I rocked up to training. You're taking so many things, and it is literally just to get yourself back to that normal level. And speaking of the grey area, recently an Australian athlete got caught in the grey area, a good friend of mine, and has been banned for 2 years, taking something that he thought was just a vitamin, and didn't end up being a vitamin, and wasn't listed under the banned substance list, and all complicated. But it's really tough as an athlete, even when I'm not competing anymore, but when I was competing, I was sponsored by a vitamin company, and ASADA wouldn't clear any of those vitamins, and they're just your pure vitamin B, vitamin C, and the grey area is a really tough area, and you can see why people do accidentally cross into that black area. So it's very tough.
Certainly.
I think, having said that, that there's no excuses for athletes anymore, because the education is so strong. There's no excuses. It takes one phone call, and you hear the sad stories, but there is no excuses. That's my opinion.
Yeah. Is it worthwhile explaining what athletes who have to go through in terms of drugs?
Certainly. Please.
So every athlete who's on the national list for any sport, which is being funded by governments of Australia, has to comply with world anti-doping policies, which are endorsed by Australia. So that means the athlete, 3 months in advance, has to nominate 1 hour of every day of the week where they will be. And that's so somebody can turn up to that one place, and that athlete has to be there, and if they're not, that's considered that they have failed to comply with a doping regulation. If there's 3 times that happens, they're struck off the list. So there is an incredible amount of compliance required by athletes. But to back that up, there's a huge, as Justin said, a huge amount of education, almost too much education, because sometimes people fall asleep when you tell them the same thing over and over and over again. But the underlying rule of it all is you as an athlete are responsible for what is found in your body. Nobody else other than you. So if it's inadvertent, it matters not. The punishment remains.
Certainly. Holly, going through that experience of all of these stringent requirements, how do you adapt to that and start to make it part of your everyday life?
I guess luckily being an elite athlete, routine becomes a necessity, and not just a necessity, almost an obsession. You get completely obsessed with the routine and having everything perfect. So for me, knowing where I'd be an hour each day was quite easy because, I used to put 6 a.m. till 7 a.m. because I knew I'd be in bed. But that always worked. I found the routine. If you're an athlete at that level, you have that type of routine that it's not too hard to comply, but it's time-consuming and sometimes annoying. But at the end of the day, it comes in part and parcel with being at that level, and you're willing to do the little things like that because being at a high level is an amazing experience, and it's a small price to pay.
Thank you very much. Justin, a question for yourself. To what extent do you believe high-profile sporting stars and people have a requirement to maintain good behaviour both on and off the field? Obviously, we've seen some interesting stories over the past few months, but what do you believe the actual requirements are that are in place?
I think it's a requirement for anyone, whether you're a sportsman or a broker or a Rotarian or a parent, to make good choices on off the field.
Certainly. Thank you very much.
And I'll tell you what I do feel strongly about is parents who say, I understand sportsmen are role models. The greatest role models on earth are the parents. Yeah. And I think it's a lot of times I accept, but if a sportsman behaves badly, it's a great opportunity for a parent or a guardian to use as an example of not how to behave. If a sportsman does something brilliantly, it's a great opportunity to learn from what they're doing. So I think it's a bit of a cop-out for people to say, they're the role models and it's your fault my kid gets grumpy at sport or takes drugs, or I think it's a bit of a cop-out.
It's a very good point. I'd open it up to the rest of the panel. Anything else to comment on the role model behaviour of our athletes and where that role really sits? Anything else to add? Steve?
Look, I would have to say I think the vast majority of the athletes that we deal with are probably lucky to have really good parents because they accept their responsibilities as community citizens, and there's no doubt our organisation would reinforce that. But I don't think we're telling them anything that they don't really know. We're just providing them avenues and opportunities to learn to express that. Just to reinforce Justin's comment, I mean, it's a community obligation. We all have to be respectful and show appropriate community values in everything we do, whether it's on or off the sporting field.
From a business point of view as well, it is critical, but because not only how you perform on the field, but if you're on the front pages of the news, like as West Australian cricket has been for some time, well then all of a sudden there's no value to sponsors, individual and collectively. So West Australian cricket at the moment hasn't got a sponsor, which I've been involved with West Australian cricket for over 20 years. We've always had a sponsor. I've just come back in as the head coach and we haven't got a sponsor. And that's a sad indictment of where we are off the field and on the field. So that's a really strong focus for us to, I was saying I'd pick character over cover drives any day. In other words, we're not only looking to produce good cricketers, but good people, because not only will they be better for our community, but it also, from a business point of view, we'll be able to attract sponsorship, and that's the reality of the business we're in.
Certainly. Thank you, Justin. I'll open this next question up to the panel. How much do you really believe that sports fans impact on the use of drugs in sport? Australia in particular, sports is a huge part of our culture. Do you believe Australian fans or fans in general actually drive or influence those drug-taking decisions?
I don't see a connection myself. You know, the individual's responsible. I mean, people cheering and screaming for you, that's fantastic. But I fail to see how you could make a link between cheering fans or screaming fans or even abusive fans and making decisions in relation to drugs of any sort, performance enhancing or otherwise.
Thank you, Steve. Shane?
What I sometimes see with athletes of different sports, but particularly professional sports and particularly ones where there's a lot of money and where there is a good infrastructure in place to help provide for a lot of athlete needs around physiology and sort of psychology and conditioning and nutrition and a lot of those things. And in a way it's related to fans, but I find at times that it creates a sense of what I think of as entitlement. And I've seen athletes that get used to things being provided for them and they kind of get to the point where they think this is the norm. And it's not everyone, but there is an element that I've seen in professional sports where it becomes an expectation. And I think that mindset influences not necessarily decisions around drugs, but sometimes there are an element who think they're above the law. And I think, you know, if potentially Lance Armstrong genuinely thinks that the rules don't apply or because other people were doing it, that it was okay. And I think that is that ultimate kind of sense of entitlement that people have been used to getting their way for so long, that sometimes that creates a different mindset, and that mindset can sometimes make decision-making that is inconsistent with what the general population would feel. And I'm interested what other people think about that as well.
I think if an athlete gets to the point where they think that fans want them to take drugs to achieve, they're severely misinterpreting what cheering is for themselves. Because although there is pressure to perform and there is media when you don't perform, when the headline came out that if you were taking drugs, no one likes you anymore, so you've clearly got the wrong message. So I don't think fans really do pour that much pressure on or influence someone to think, yeah, I'm going to take drugs so that I can achieve and my fans will love me. I don't think that's a correct idea.
Fans are so fickle, like the media, that if you're thinking about it that way, you're crazy. I mean, if you play well, they love you. If you're not, they don't. And the same with the media. If you do well, they'll write nice things about you. If you play poorly, they'll write negatively about you. So you've got to have a broader sense of things if you...
Never read your own press?
Thank you very much. I would like to then ask and transition into this question. Do you believe that fans really care about the athletes they idolise taking drugs? Open that one up to the panel.
It's a really tough question because I think the fans want to see you win.
At all costs?
As long as you don't get caught. I truly believe that.
Yeah, I agree with that.
There is an element of don't ask, don't tell. As long as I don't know, and I'm content in the sense that I don't know what goes on. I'm assuming it's all above board, but don't tell me, don't spoil that illusion.
So you'd be saying that an athlete could take that view as a reason as to why, well, if they don't care, then they've got no morals, so why should I? I agree fans are fickle, but I would just hope that Australian society, if I go to Australia, doesn't want a win at all costs, because I don't see how that's, to me, is Australian. And sport to me is so Australian that, and now I think our community stands for greater things. I think I absolutely agree there are fans like that, but I reckon they're the fans that should be showing the gate.
How many West Coast Eagles supporters in this room? I'm sure there's a few. When we were winning the premierships, we're worried with Ben Cousin was on drugs or not.
There'd be a few.
There'd be a few, yeah. There'd be a few, but at the time when you're seeing Ben Cousins, beautifully ripped athlete, kicking goals, running until he vomited, and thinking this guy is a genius. Every time I go to the gym, I still want to look like Ben Cousins.
How are you going with that?
But I just wonder, and I wonder how many people were devastated when it came out about Lance Armstrong.
Yeah.
I was devastated. You know, but I suppose it's, look, and I'm inside the industry, and I got inside the industry for a specific reason. I mean, we all get to make choices. You know, I have a passionate view about sport and what it can do to build communities, and therefore I would hope that it's a really positive influence, and therefore the people around it, you know, see it in that manner. But I accept the fact that there are people that are willing to see a win above all things. But you know, you would hope, you know, a win made in an honest fashion against a hard competitor is something that we should be able to celebrate, and a loss against a better competitor when we've fought it out should be enough for anybody to walk away from the field and say, geez, we gave it a bloody good shot, and the boys will come back harder next time. That's what you'd hope.
And I agree 100%. Yeah. Having said, and that's why I'm absolutely zero tolerance to drugs. For a number of reasons. Chris Mainwaring was a friend of mine. I was with him the day he died, and he died as publicly. And I would have hated to thought that when I was a player, someone was using performance-enhancing drugs to either take my position away from me in the Australian cricket team, or a fast bowler was bowling at me and having an advantage. We know since we're little kids, no one likes to cheat. You don't like a cheat in the office. You don't like a cheat in your house. You don't like a cheat. So I hate the whole notion of it. But I think sometimes we can get blinded by that celebrity or blinded by that winning. And an example is West Coast Eagles a few years ago. And I'm a mad West Coast Eagles supporter. But there's some great examples there, and I'm zero tolerance to drugs.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately we are out of time, but they will be sticking around to answer any further questions you do have. So please join me in thanking our expert panel for being with us this evening.